Good afternoon, and welcome to the Editor's Podcast for the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I am Dr. Linda Snetzelaar, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal, and today this podcast is going to focus on everything related to elementary school meals. And I'm very happy to have with me Dr. Kate Wilson, who is Executive Director of Urban School Food Alliance. And I have a few questions for Kate. That are related to school lunches. And I know that this topic is one that is of great interest to our Academy membership. So I'm excited to have your responses to these questions. So I will begin with the first question. The USDA has a new policy for school meals. And what does that new policy involve?
Well, thank you, Linda, for having me on this podcast. The new policy is really still in proposal phase. We've not seen the final regulations yet. But what that policy is just taking the nutrition standards another step forward from the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act. So we know that many times these are the only meals children access during the day. And it's really our obligation to make sure that those are the best, highest quality meals we can for not only taste and preference, but also overall health. So those are just, again, another step forward in sodium. We are looking at a sugar limit, which I think is long overdue in school meals. We are looking at a number of other smaller items in the school meal program, but the sodium limit and the sugar limit are some of the biggest.
With the new stricter standards, what are some practical trade-offs, for example, related to cost or maybe acceptability?
Well, I think acceptability is always an issue. In the school nutrition program, we operate under a per meal reimbursement program. So that means I have to get those consumer savvy students through that line. And, even in elementary school, those kids have been out in the consumer marketplace. They are consumer savvy. They are marketed to very heavily from food companies in every aspect of their life. So it's my goal to get them through that line because that's the only way I can get my federal reimbursement rates is if I have them every day on a daily basis. I have to take my counts and submit those. So acceptability is a huge issue. The commercial marketplace has not caught up to the nutrition standards that we're using in schools. That's something we need to think about. It's also something we need to talk about. I know when I talk to dietetic students across this country, I always say to them, there is no K-12 nutrition education curriculum in our school systems, not a standardized one based on science anyway. So these are things we have to think about when we think about acceptability. We say to a student, you shouldn't take this, or you should have less of this, but we're not educating them as to why. We're also not educating them, we're not doing a good job of educating them on what good alternatives are, and that really healthy food is good. It's good food. And I really think that we have to think about acceptability in the main front of this conversation. The cost factor is an issue. We have had districts with distributors and manufacturers sending them notes. Their costs went up 345% this year. We don't get that much for a reimbursement from the federal government. It just doesn't cover the 5 components of a meal, especially if those products are made specifically for schools, and those manufacturers cannot sell those on the commercial marketplace. They're only for schools. That becomes problematic when you think about the procurement process, and the cost factor keeps going up. So both of those are very, very important topics to speak about through this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Very important points, and especially that idea where we need to do a lot more with educating our students. Very, very important point. From the food service perspective, what will the new policy mandate that's different from what was required in the past?
Well, first of all, they gave some choices, so we'll see what comes out in the new regulations. So we had choices, for instance, for whole grain rich. They said, should we continue to do what we're doing with 50% whole grain rich throughout the week? And it's averaged over the course of a week. Or should we just take one day where you can serve any kind of enriched grains that you want? They don't have to be whole grain enriched. So they don't have to be whole grain rich. So we have to really think about that. What are the logistics of that? Who's going to track all of that? Who's going to manage all of that? I think that the same thing with the sodium content. We are looking at added sodium. Or added the sodium. I'm sorry, the sodium content is the total sodium content. But when we're looking at sugar, they're talking about added sugar. So we really think that logistically, it should all be added. You can't have bread if you don't have sodium in that bread. It's no longer bread. There's some sodium in milk. And so we're having to incorporate that as part of our sodium limit. But when it comes to sugar, they're talking about added sugar. And so that makes sense to me because as we try to make some celebrities understand, there is a certain amount of sugar in milk. It's just there, right? It's natural. So the same thing with sugar, they're talking about, is it just a total percentage of calories from sugar over the course of a week? Or are they going to go after certain foods, and only certain foods can have this, certain amount of grams of sugar, just like they do in the Women, Infant, and Children's Nutrition Program. So there are some choices there. Now, logistically, particularly in our large districts that I represent, some of those choices are very difficult to figure out logistically. The percentage over a course of the week in sugar, we can figure that out because of our menu planning and our production records. If you're deciding on specific food items, then I think a lot has to do with what item is that child going to choose? How do you identify all that? Again, how do you track all of that information to try to figure out? Remember also that you have hundreds of children going through a school lunch line within minutes. This isn't a time where they get to choose and you're talking to them about their meal or talking to them about their choices. They literally have minutes to get through that line and consume that food before they're out for recess or on to their next thing. So that's also another really big issue that we have to tackle. And logistically, how do we make these changes? How do we serve healthier food? We all know that fresh fruits and vegetables, frozen fruits and vegetables, they're all very good for you, but they take time to eat. And so how do you consume all that when you have less than 10 minutes to get through a line, sit down and eat? Especially a child, they want to visit, they want to talk. So logistically, let's think about all of these things and how is that going to work? That's yet to be seen once we decide what the federal regulation is going to be.
Thank you. Such important points. What are some of the practical aspects of implementing the policy, and how will that basically affect the schools in general?
I think the practical aspects are really important. And I've always said that my career started in a small rural school district of only 1,700 children in Wisconsin. That district took a risk when they hired me as a professional director of food service. They had never had one before. And I say this about all school nutrition programs. They are only as good as the district chooses them to be, because the regulations are there and they've been there forever and they continue to progress. And again, I really believe we have an obligation to do the best we can in our school system. We don't ask kids, do you want to take algebra or not? You take algebra if you're going to go into 8th or 9th grade. So I believe the same thing about the school nutrition program. But districts have to invest in this. They have to see it as a vital part of education, a vital part of learning. Child overall health is so important when they get into that classroom. Are they ready to learn? Are they ready to get all the knowledge that's waiting for them to be taught? So I think that we have to really think about, how does each district decide to invest in their school nutrition program and make sure that the person running the program, the logistics of this, the practicality of this, is with good background in nutrition and food service management. That's how you can figure out how to do it. In a small rural school district in Wisconsin, we were doing this in the 90s. This is not new. We didn't have to change anything. We had all you can eat salad bars back in the early 90s. But that's because logistically I knew how to do that. And so you need to know how to manage your team. You need to know how to write menus so that they're nutritionally adequate. That's part of the practicality of this, is who's at the helm. And at the time, our small rural district was losing $40,000 a year. And within a year, we put them in the budget in the black, because it's in the positive, because we knew how to manage food service. And so that's the practicality piece of this. The other thing is getting kids to accept something. So when we switched to brown rice, we just switched. We didn't tell anybody. We didn't do 50-50. We just switched because we knew it was better for kids. So the message we gave our team was that when the kids came through the line and they said, "Oh, what's that?" Well, we know that a certain fast food restaurant is in the mall, right? Is in the mall now. And this is the rice they're serving. So we knew that you liked this rice. That's why we put it on the line. You get a much more positive response from children than if you say, well, the USDA is requiring this. I mean, really, what are you going to get from a kid, right? So the whole practicality of this is, how do you manage that? And how do you do your marketing and your convincing of people that this is what's in the best interest of children? And then you have to get to make sure that the children are willing to accept it as well.
Yes, yes. Oh, such important ideas. Wow. And all of them very real world. Thank you. And my last question is for a practicing registered dietitian who's involved in, let's say, counseling families on healthy eating. What might be some takeaway messages that could be emphasized in terms of this change in school meals?
Well, when we're working with families, and we actually just had a registered dietitian join our board of directors from the New York City Children's Hospital, and he directs the Children's Nutrition Center there. And he kind of helps us with some of that as well. But I really think the message to families is, first of all, make sure that your school nutrition program is available to you. Do you have breakfast? Do you have lunch? Is there an after-school snack? Get actively involved in that wellness committee. Have parents, let parents know that there's a wellness committee that they can become involved in. And I really think that the message is that that is really a nutritionally balanced meal. But taking the menu, which is usually published, and going through that menu with families, saying, here are some of the better choices for you. Many times families will say, well, my child isn't getting enough to eat. Well, let's find out, is there an all-you-can-eat salad bar? Let's, as a registered dietitian, work with those families to encourage them to have their children go try some of those fresh fruits and vegetables that are on that salad bar. That's where you can fill your plate up, not so much with the main entree, but with the rest of the items that are out there. Because many times we find out children come home and they say, well, I didn't get enough to eat. Well, they might have taken the main entree, but they didn't go to the salad bar. They didn't take some of the other options that are available. So I think working with those families to get involved in their school setting and ask the questions of the food service folks that are there as to what is available, and then helping those families go through that menu and think about what are some of the best choices you could take to make sure that you're full, but also meeting the nutrients necessary for growth.
Thank you. So incredibly helpful. And I so appreciate this heads up on a new policy that's going to be very important to millions of people. And want to thank you for your wonderful responses to my questions. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate the time.